We have, it appears, two bills for discussion and regulations. First one being R 190212, a resolution proclaiming July 16th as General Mad Anthony Wayne Day in the city of Fort Wayne. And I will turn the floor over to fellow Councilman Jason Arp.
Thank you, Councilman Branda. So I had a constituent contact me a couple years ago on July the 16th and said, hey, we should have an Anthony Wayne Day in the city of Fort Wayne. July 16th is the anniversary of the victory at Stony Point, New York. And so that kind of got me onto this, and I had talked about it a couple of years ago, but I met an author of a book on the subject that actually lives here in Fort Wayne, and I've done a couple of years worth of research on Anthony Wayne. So have a little presentation. Right. This was a quote that Anthony Wayne sent to General Washington after the victory at Stony Point. Our officers and men behave like men determined to be free. And to me, that just gives me chills. It inspires me. That's what, as Americans, we should all want to be free. It's kind of the embodiment of what it means to be an American. So here's a list of the accomplishments that Anthony Wayne had during the War for Independence. Ma'am, do you mind moving this camera so I can see this screen? That one goes out intermittently. Thank you. He formed his own militia unit in 1775 when the war was beginning. I guess I'm out of time.
Can we use this more often? I like it.
He had some success there and was appointed the colonel of the 4th Pennsylvania Regiment. And then he led the Continental Army at the Battle of Stony Point. So let me give you a little bit of context. How many of you have heard of Benedict Arnold?
Very familiar.
Right. Benedict Arnold basically told the British command where General Wayne was encamped. And he was encamped at West Point, New York. They had the British Army surround West Point, with their biggest encampment being at Stony Point. And they were preparing for a raid at West Point the next day. Washington was made aware of the plan from his own spies and instructed Anthony Wayne to intervene. And so Anthony Wayne took about 500 of the men in a midnight raid, told his men to leave the ball and powder back at the camp so that way it wouldn't wake anyone up. And it was a bayonets-only attack at Stony Point. And the defeat of the British at Stony Point allowed Washington and General Knox and Greene and the rest of the commanders to escape New York, and we continued to fight the American Revolution. If not, it would have been over that day. So we can thank Anthony Wayne for the fact that we have a United States of America. He also had tactical victories that enabled the triumph at Yorktown. They had some losses, but he was so good at covering the rear of retreating lines that they were able to fight another day. That's actually quite an art to be able to do that. And then finally, even after Yorktown, the British refused to leave America, even though they had signed a surrender treaty at Yorktown. They were encamped at Savannah, and General Greene instructed Anthony Wayne to perform a siege of Savannah and to drive out the last elements of the British armies that were in the colonies. And a couple of things about these things. The battle at Stony Point, Anthony Wayne was shot in the head, knocked off his horse. He got up, he was kind of woozy, he had his aide-de-camp wrap his head and put him on the shoulders of men so that way they could see him continuing to lead the battle. He did this for the sake of the morale of his troops, so they could see that, okay, we're even though he's been shot, we're going to keep fighting. So he was also shot in the stomach in Savannah, and he survived that. So he showed a good bit of courage and determination. This is the book that I've read on the subject. Alan Gaff actually lives here in Fort Wayne, and this book was published by the Oklahoma University. I guess they publish books there at Oklahoma University, and this is about 450 pages. It tells a lot about Anthony Wayne's life and a lot of specific details about the conquests in the Northwest. A little bit of background about the Northwest campaign. Before Anthony Wayne he was basically in retirement. He was actually in Congress at this time. Little Turtle defeated General Harmer right here in what was Kikianga at the time. Today we call it Fort Wayne, obviously. In that defeat, Harmer lost about 290 soldiers. November 4th, 1791, the Miami and the Shawnee got together and defeated General St. Clair in what was at that time the greatest defeat of the American Army in our short history. It was over 1,000 casualties, men, women, and children. At this time, you brought the whole family with you. They conducted war a little different than they do today, I guess. But this was a major loss, and this really affected the morale, not only of the soldiers that were there, but of the entire country. This was kind of like a 9/11 of their day. It was kind of shocking to them to have that sort of loss. In July of 1792, President Washington calls General Wayne out of retirement and appoints Wayne the commander-in-chief of the Legion of the United States. Now, at this time, we didn't have a United States Army. The Continental Army had been dissolved after the war, and we had more or less state militias. This was the first reforming of a national army with professional soldiers. And you can see that it was a couple of years before Wayne got back to this part of the country, because Wayne was a student of history, particularly a student of Julius Caesar and the conquest of Gaul. When Wayne was assigned this assignment, he thought of Caesar's, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Julius Caesar conquering Gaul. Gaul was kind of the wilderness of that time when Rome was the power of the world. And so he studied his methods of going along, building forts along the way, making sure that you had lines to both refortify with and to retreat to. You want to make sure you can maintain your forces. This showed a lot of patience of Wayne to wait that long before directly engaging in battle the way St. Clair had done unsuccessfully previously. So in August of 1794, Anthony Wayne was victorious at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. And though a lot of people thought that the purpose of this, of Wayne's mission was to get revenge for what had happened to Clair, Wayne did not extract any sort of revenge. The casualties of the British and natives, most accounts show them at less than 50 people from that side. So he basically forced them to sign a surrender treaty and did not do any kind of mass execution or anything like what had happened to St. Clair's people a couple years previously. So why an Anthony Wayne Day? Well, first of all the stuff that I just learned, I didn't learn until someone proposed to me, hey, we should have an Anthony Wayne Day. And the guy's pretty remarkable. These two little kids, they've learned a lot too. Those are my daughters, and they're standing there by the Anthony Wayne statue here. I think it's important to know our history, and having an Anthony Wayne Day may encourage people to learn a little bit about him and what he's done. And I think, he's given us some stuff that we can look up to. Bravery, determination, persistence, patience, and lastly, mercy, as he had shown to the defeated Miami and Shawnee at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. So July 16th is not only the anniversary of Stony Point, but it's also during the Three Rivers Festival. So this will be a great opportunity to maybe have a float in the parade, have reenactors involved in it. And this year is also the 225th anniversary of Fallen Timbers. So when I first announced, talked about this a couple years ago, I had a few people reach out to me, and Mr. Bob Jones from the Fort Wayne Historical Society was kind enough to reach out to me. Do you mind coming up and telling us a little bit about your organization and the opportunities that Anthony Wayne presents?
Thank you for such a, oh, really? Okay, wow. First time ever coming to a meeting, and I find myself at the table. That was unexpected. Thank you so much. Okay, I'll be brief. I'll be brief. Well, thank you for a wonderful, excellent presentation of history that is very near and dear to my heart, having been a fourth grade teacher teaching Indiana history. When I got involved, my name is Bob Jones, a retired elementary teacher and one of the directors, the vice president of the directors at Historic Fort Wayne. So I had to really get up to speed on more of our local history and the War of 1812, the war that many people have forgotten. But it's fascinating, and what really keeps me going is the biographies, the stories, and I think it's a great method to present for visitors, especially students, in terms of William Wells and Little Turtle and Sweet Breeze, who now has a watercraft named after her. That's really exciting. And some of the other people who have kind of drifted off into history, especially Angeline Chapoteau, and I won't start going through all those, but that's why I'm involved keeping the fort in Fort Wayne. So we do all we can to maintain the structure. It's just a great focal point. We have educational programs all year long. During weeks of single digits, we had 70 reenactors from all over the country at the fort, and a great number of public, given the difficult conditions. Last weekend and this coming weekend, we have events open to the public presenting living history. And what was it like? What did it feel like? What did it smell like in 18 whatever? Because we embrace living history over a variety, all of our time periods, and we have events called timelines, in which you might meet Vikings and members of the First Division, the Normandy invasion. So that I hope makes it very interesting for the public. And so I speak in favor of having an Anthony Wayne Day. Just a brief check. I found a lot of cities that have a special day to honor their founder, whoever that may be, or Founders Day, because it may not have been one individual. I met Bob tonight. I'm sitting with him for the first time, and he's got a Marine jacket on. My dad's a Marine, and when I meet a veteran, I thank them for their service, because I know that it meant personal sacrifice. And I began thinking, Anthony Wayne was a veteran. We should thank him if we could. He would have, as you pointed out, he would have received the Purple Heart had that been in place at the time. I visited Waynesboro in Pennsylvania, and I learned a lot about his early life, and it was really exciting. I think it's fitting to have a day to honor our founder. He's not Anthony Wayne the Great, but he sure did a lot of great things, and it's like I think it's a great idea. It'll enable us to switch our focus on that day to help draw attention to that. We know Anthony Wayne reenactors that we can have a persona. We don't have his horse, though, sadly. That would be a dramatic addition. But as long as we're Americans, I think we should honor those who did sacrifice personally and had some contribution to make. I think he had a great contribution. Yeah. And so does our city council. Thank you.
Thank you.
For looking at this question.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you coming up tonight.
All right, questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, hey, Bob, my favorite subject in high school, by the way, was U.S. history. I had a great history teacher. His name was Bob Herbert. I believe Bob's gone now. He's deceased, but he was a great history teacher, and I enjoyed my class thoroughly. I knew a little bit about Anthony Wayne, but just with this little thing, I felt like I was back in school again, learning this stuff. I love U.S. history. It's phenomenal. I don't have any issues with this particular, resolution or whatever. It's a resolution, so.
I yielded the floor, so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yielded. That's why we're going to you, Jason.
Thank you. All right.
No, I wanted to congratulate you. It looks like you put a lot of time.
Yeah.
I was a U.S. history teacher, so I came across, General Wayne many, many times. But I think it's important for all of us in Fort Wayne to identify with our identity, our character, and the integrity of Fort Wayne. I think there's always a time in everybody's lives where, they may be sitting in a chair saying, I need to look up the history of Fort Wayne. What happened at the beginning of Fort Wayne? So this, like you said, you didn't know much about it before you studied it. I think this is going to bring more people into the context of studying that, and I'll back it. I think it's great.
Right. And, my wife, her entire life was, Fort Wayne Community Schools, and she didn't really know much about Anthony Wayne at all, sadly. And that's not a statement about the schools. It's just, I guess it wasn't a priority or whatever. But I think by having a day in which we announce it to be Anthony, people will at least know something about the guy. Mm-hmm. The city's named after him, and we should know something about him. And he has a history that, how many people would you know that, like, I'll give you an example. The day before the Battle of Fallen Timbers, there was a British spy in their camp who had cut down a tree and had it fall on Anthony Wayne's tent, and it smashed his leg. His reaction to that was to call in the aide-de-camp to cut the tree off of him and get him on his horse, so that way he could ride around the camp to let his men know that he was okay. And the beginning stages of the Battle of Fallen Timbers was not going very well, and he saw that his men started retreating. He began the charge. His aide-de-camp had to chase him down on his horse and grab Anthony Wayne to keep him from getting to the front line. It just kind of shows you what a kind of courageous, brave man. Maybe that wasn't the smartest thing to do, but it was he was fearless. So someone that you could admire. Councilman Hines.
And that's probably why they call him Mad Anthony.
Yeah, that's right.
I too was a history major at Manchester, and Dr. David Wise was my best professor, and he used to tell us that the conqueror tells the story, and that's why they call it history. And I'm a little taken back. I won't be supporting this because the Native Americans were Native Americans, and instead of peaceful negotiations, opportunities to purchase land, it was end up being war. And the genocide of the Native Americans, and you talked about the Miami and the Shawnee and things of that nature. But as we know historically, correctly, that the genocide of the Native Americans impacted those Americans who were here first, and we talk about everybody seeking freedom. The one thing that I read the other day about the Underground Railroad and Arch, which has the building that's still standing, is that they were for freedom of all Americans, and that's why the Underground Railroad was there. But I think we have to be considerate of those Native Americans, the ancestors who still live here, and their feelings as it relates to what you refer to as a wilderness, what they refer to as their homes. And there was many Indian nations, Native American nations, that existed. And I thought rather than negotiating for land or purchasing land, the option that was chosen was to take the land. So I will not be supporting this.
Councilman Crawford?
Just a question. Do you anticipate any negative reaction to this from other groups like Glenn was just alluding to?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's always going to be people that are detractors of things. I mean, there's lots of people that don't care for America or American history. There are people that are just not patriotic, and that's their right, obviously. But that doesn't mean that we don't still continue to celebrate President's Day.
I was just leading up to, this all came up kind of sudden. There wasn't a whole lot of publicity up to this point. You think we should vote on it tonight or let it have a couple of weeks to percolate and see what we hear?
I think the members of this council have probably already formulated their ideas of whether or not this is something they support or not. And I mean, you would know from your constituents whether or not this is something that this has been on the agenda for a few weeks now, and if you haven't gotten feedback by now, it's gonna, your vote is more or less your conscience at this point. It's not like this. We don't hide these things away. All these agendas and these introductions are made public, and this has been out there for a few weeks. And in fact, this concept has been out there for 2 years.
Real quick, I was just going to say the characterization of people not being patriotic because they don't accept your proposal is actually a misnomer. I think you have patriotic individuals who have served that would still, if they were of Native American ancestry, would be somewhat offended by the idea of recognizing a specific date. We have the statue, we have obviously the 4th of July, we have celebrations of all types, but just because they don't support this idea would not make them not patriotic.
Councilman Inslee?
Yes, I will be supporting this, and I would just warn against the folly, in my opinion, of viewing historical events through a lens of modern morality. There are a lot of things that have been acceptable throughout history. There's probably a lot of things we do today that maybe in the future people will look back and say, well, Councilman Arp spanked his kids. I don't know if you do or not, but I don't think. But maybe 50 or 100 years from now, it would be my hope that things like that would not be acceptable,
Taboo.
and would be taboo. But that being said, certainly for the overwhelming majority of human history, the right of conquest has been certainly an acceptable form of acquiring land with regards to the Native Americans. Obviously, Anthony Wayne, as Councilman Arp has recounted to us, was very merciful and sought a less violent solution, a less violent means than what the Native Americans had shown the Europeans before that. And so again, I will look forward to supporting this and honoring General Wayne July 16th.
Councilman Miranda?
First point being, this is a resolution.
Yes, sir.
So I don't really know the effect of council signing a resolution to declare July 16th as General Mad Anthony Wayne Day, other than it is, a recognition and an opportunity to have a discussion. Things that I learned tonight were both good and bad about General Mad Anthony Wayne, and I think that's what these things do, is start a discussion and allow us to talk about our history so that we can learn from it. And when we stop doing that, we stop learning. And so that is why I will be supporting the resolution, because I think in the spirit of what we try to do within the history lesson is learn the good and the bad, and I think that's what this does. It doesn't try to celebrate the perfection of a person or the, trying to make someone that he wasn't. It just simply recognizes he is our founder. July 16th is an important day. Let's talk. So with that, I'm going to move to approve.
I'll second it.
And I'll yield back to.
Oh, well, then I
Councilman
won't. I was going to let you do it, so, well, then I will withdraw my motion. And I'll
Well,
withdraw.
obviously, I motion to approve. I guess, can I do that?
Yeah, you move.
Yeah, you can move to pass. I'll second it.
A motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Any abstention? Okay, motion carries.
Good evening, Stephanie Henry, 5 Points Neighborhood. I'm going to say this as an individual. This is not as a professional thing, but I would like to thank Councilman Hines for your comments regarding the Anthony Wayne Day. Unfortunately, Councilman Arp, I am also in opposition to the resolution as it's stated, because I believe that if you're going to tell the history of the area, it should tell both sides of the history and all of the people involved. As a descendant of Native American people and African American people, I think we can do better, and we should do better as a community in educating. I think the story of Anthony Wayne should be told, but I think the story of the rest of the Native American people and the other indigenous people to this region should be told equally as well. Thank you. Have a good evening.
All right.